This Week in E-Commerce, episode 95. Mal Cheer here for another week. Now, I'm flying solo this week as Alex is off doing something decidedly less fun than talking shop with me. But we've still got a lot to cover as we head into the dog days of retail. Now, we're post end of financial year sale. We've now got a few months where things are probably going to be a little bit more quiet than what we'd like as we get ready for peak season. But it's not all quiet because there's been a lot of news which has been going on. In particular, retailers starting to put the brakes on free shipping and returns, the overlooked power of micro moments, Trump's big, beautiful bill, and what that $3 trillion deficit could potentially mean for us, and a look at dupe culture, in particular, how Lululemon are taking on Costco in a lawsuit. But before we get into that, Online Retailer is only a few weeks away on the 23rd and the 24th in Sydney at the ICC. If you haven't already grabbed your pass, now's the time. It is one of Australia's biggest e-commerce conferences and expo with a lot of free events as well as the main sessions as well. I'll be speaking, hosting the Nora podcast stage yet again, networking, having a few drinks, and obviously attending the Aureas as well. Now, if you would like to come along, you can use my code MALCHEER for a free show floor pass, and I'm going to put the link in the show notes this episode. So let's dive straight into it. Before we get into the main stories, a few quick ones. Number one is that Amazon Prime Day has launched today on Tuesday, the 8th of July. And this is going to be the biggest Prime Day they're expecting, with sales tipped to exceed $23.8 billion globally. Now, this has become more than just about discounts for Amazon. It's about really reshaping the whole shopping behavior. Because for Amazon, they actually get a number of things out of this. Number one is that it's an opportunity for them to grow their Prime memberships, which are continuing to go on the up, especially in Australia, where that just grows and grows and grows with the value which they add through the bundles, through the Prime Video, Prime Music, and so much more. But also for Amazon, they also have a lot of their own private label products as well. For those of you who haven't heard, Amazon will find a product which sells really well and make their own cheap knockoff of it and push that instead. And this is the time where they can get significant volume of those products sold. But the bad news for retail is that it really changes the whole expectations for the rest of the year, because retailers on Amazon will see a huge spike over this period, and likely they're going to have sales as well if they're discounting. But it trains consumers to wait for these big mega sale periods rather than buying outside of it, as you all would know by now. And that's a really dangerous game to play, because it just means that we have more of these peaks and troughs throughout the year, which makes revenue harder to forecast and harder for us to run profitable, sustainable businesses. So if you're a retailer, don't try to out Amazon. You really need to focus on your value over discounts, as you've heard time and time again. But really think about how you could also use this week to combat Amazon through bundles, GWPs, loyalty rewards, but anything which maintains the value of your product and doesn't diminish that. Now, the RBA also announced today that they are keeping interest rates on hold at 3.85%. And this is despite a lot of whispers around there being a cut this month, which would have been the third in a row, or the fourth in a row. Now, why didn't they do this? My hunch, it's because housing prices have increased 1.7% in the last month, which is up from 1.1% averaged out over the last year. And because we started to see this heating up of the housing market, the RBA is concerned that things are going to get out of hand again with inflation, with more people coming in to borrow, which means that they needed to look at how do we actually kind of control this without necessarily increasing interest rates again. And don't forget, this is like the only lever which the RBA really has to pull to manage inflation. So right now, property owners are really feeling rich. If you are an investor, you're definitely feeling much better off over this period. But for lower income earners and non-homeowners and renters, you're probably feeling the pinch a lot more. So this recovery is not going to happen the same for everyone. For the upper end of the market who have a portfolio, they're probably spending more or spending the same throughout this period. But for everyone else, they're definitely feeling the pinch and continuing to feel the pinch. And there was a story which came out today in Inside Retail around, are we heading into potentially the worst year of retail ever? And we're going to cover that off next week. But our first major story we're going to jump into is the report from ShipIt, which shows that retailers are really rethinking free delivery and returns. Now, this was something which everyone always says it's a lever which you can pull to overcome any objections to purchase by making it free to ship or free to return products. So making that whole friction and removing that friction from the equation somewhat as well. And over the last 10 or so years, it's become accepted that that is the norm, that when you spend over a certain amount, there is a free shipping threshold. But as we all know, it's free for the consumer, but it's not free for the retailer. And as we see demand being diminished and operational costs starting to increase, margins are getting thinner and thinner and thinner. And also when you factor in that returns are also becoming a real profitability killer and always have been, but with people returning more and more. In marketplaces, you see return rates up to 50% in some marketplaces. And with a lot of retailers, particularly in the fashion industry, that can be up as high as 20%, if not higher. And all this adds up to putting a real squeeze on margins for retailers and their ability to actually operate profitable, sustainable businesses. So I really commend retailers for really taking the bull by the horns and looking at how we address that and starting to try to shift that behavior away from the expectation that there's going to be free shipping and returns to really saying that this is something which costs money and we need to be able to recoup some of this cost as well. And you can see a lot of brands doing this now, like H&M are now charging for online returns. Uniqlo also doing the same. Not free returns, you have to pay for that shipping back. And others are doing free shipping and free returns based on loyalty or some sort of tiered spending where, again, the free shipping thresholds where you spend a certain amount, you get the shipping for free. Or if you have a certain amount of loyalty with a brand, you can unlock free returns. So it's really important that you rethink where your free shipping threshold is to try to reduce what your cash burn is on each order to improve your margins. And also thinking about what you could potentially be doing to recoup some of that cost as well, or try to incentivize different behavior from that. So this is a band-aid which I think a lot of us need to jump into rather than wait. Because if only a few people do it, we still maintain the expectation that there is going to be there. But if a lot of retailers jump into it and start advocating and start off saying that shipping and returns now are going to cost you, yes, it may have a short-term impact on conversion rates and your sales, but there's a long-term benefit to all of this as well, because in the future, all orders will become much more profitable. So a few things to do if you're thinking about doing this is, first of all, to make sure that you communicate it really, really clearly. It's important here to be super transparent with customers why you are making these changes. And I would advocate on being totally honest with it as well. Being honest with why we need to make these changes because of the global pressures with supply chains, with demand, interest rates, cost of living, operating costs, all those things that we need to make some tough decisions, because what's worse for the customer isn't necessarily not being able to buy. It's that you won't be around for them to buy from. But you can also soften the blow by making sure that you offer some sort of value prop for your loyal customers, that they can still access that if they are a repeat customer of yours. That may be a lever you can use to unlock free shipping and further loyalty. So it's a real opportunity now for the e-commerce industry to change this habit, which we've built up over the last 10 or so years, and really reset expectations around what customers can expect when they shop online. Our next story, we're going to be talking about sweating the small stuff and the power of micro moments. And this came from a great article from Inside Retail. And it's one of my favorite topics because this really reminds me of the peak end rule. Now, the peak end rule says that the two moments of a transaction, which people remember, are the peak, which is when they buy, or more accurately, the moment before they buy and all the dopamine hits, and the end, when they receive the product. And it's super important to make sure that your end is also a high note as well. You don't want to end on a down. Otherwise, that leads to a lot of cognitive dissonance when it comes to the product they've just purchased from you. You want the customer to have a really great experience. And this is all about how do you actually maximize that end experience, even beyond the moment when they receive it, continuing on to things like unboxing or when they're actually using the product. So a few brands and products to really think about is Frank Green. Frank Green are incredibly intentional about everything which they do with their product in their whole unboxing experience. Every item beautifully packaged. The product feels weighty in your hand. When you close the lid, it feels very satisfying and intentional that this thing is very well made. It doesn't feel loose or jiggly. In the same way, Apple have that same amazing experience as well, where the whole experience is super elegant. From actually buying a product from them, having it land on your doorstep, and then receiving it, even opening the box, they've thought about how it's taped up. It's not just tape put on it. It's a very intentional tape in terms of how you have to tear it off, and then that satisfying whoosh when you open the lid of the box. All this adds to the value you feel when you purchase that, where you really feel that you're purchasing something worthy of the amount you've paid for that as well. And it's a very tactile experience too. It's not just sending a few emails telling people, hope you have a great experience, come and review us and give us 5 stars. There's a whole choreography and art form to it as well. But also on the smaller scale as well, some brands like Sometimes Always, they create personalized thank you videos for each one of their customers when they order from them to really elevate that experience and help them feel like they're receiving something of value and they've made a really great choice. Amino Z do the same thing with handwritten notes in their orders, recommending new flavors, or whoever packed it telling them that's also one of their favorite flavors. All these things add to that experience of creating those micro moments when you purchase from a brand that you feel that it's elevated and you're not just buying a commodity. But the thing to remember with all of these micro moments is that they don't scale. And sometimes you need to do things which don't scale, because ultimately that's why they work. Because we can't replicate it out and just press one button and it goes out to 1 million people, that each one of these takes time, because that time shows that the brand cares, because it feels crafted, not templated. And that's ultimately why it feels so special. Because in the world where there's so much AI, so much automation, we want those moments where we feel recognized as humans, where we feel that someone has actually understood us, is listening to us, and is giving us something of value back. And those things are what people remember and what they talk about as well. Because ultimately, for a lot of the products you buy, it's a commodity. Someone also has a similar product, which probably does the exact same thing and probably came from the same factory as well. So you need to think about what moments you can put around it so that your product gets elevated to something people remember and will talk about. So when you're thinking about your next release, when you're thinking about launching a brand, think about all those things you can add to your packaging, your confirmation emails to elevate that experience. Little Easter eggs, little nods to the customer. Make sure that you do personalize, use humor and warmth through all your communications. And surprise them with something post-purchase, a free gift, a little video. All these things, all these micro delight moments and consistency helps to create depth around your brand. And also something which people will love without discounting. Now, if you have been living under a rock, you probably didn't know that Donald Trump recently signed into law the Big Beautiful Bill Act, which ultimately will amount to a $3 trillion hole in the US budget. So he managed to get this through due to some creative accounting and, let's face it, a fairly weak party who wouldn't stand up to him. And it's going to really affect the US economy, both in the short term and in the long term as well. Now, on the surface, what it's all about is that it's framed as being, it's about tax cuts, defense spending, and infrastructure spending, which on the surface doesn't sound like a bad thing. We kind of want those things. We want more money to be spent in infrastructure. We might want more money to be spent on defense. And who doesn't like tax cuts? But the problem is that the tax cuts are only for the rich, the very, very rich, that is Donald Trump's billionaire friends. And it takes money away from things like healthcare, education, food, which help the lower socioeconomic classes. And ultimately, because of these cuts, but also that additional spending as well, you've got a government which has less money coming in, spending more money on other things, and ultimately driving up the US deficit, which will affect the cost of borrowing and make borrowing more expensive in the United States. Now, this is a very real potential for retailers, is that it will push the interest rates higher for longer, which means future generations are going to need to pay this back at some stage, which means that global investors who, when the US wants to create more money, will sell treasury bonds. Global investors, foreign countries, will typically buy those treasury bonds. But because of the debt, they will demand a higher yield from it as well, the higher interest rate. Now, what this could all mean is that the price of the US dollar is going to get stronger, which will weaken the Australian dollar. And for most Australian retailers who are buying their goods from other countries, you're typically paying in USD, which means your imports are going to get more expensive. So being able to fund your purchases is going to get harder and harder as borrowing costs rise globally. So as we previously talked about with all the tariffs, you really need to watch your exposure to US-based suppliers and look at how you could potentially be holding more USD. So whether you're working with a service like Airwallex or even a Revolut, you need to be looking at how you can lock in your foreign exchange rates where you can by holding USD. And also start to rethink about your pricing strategy as well if your cost base starts to increase. Now, this is also compounded with the fact that earlier today, all the tariffs look like they've been pushed back for another 30 days. So the 1st of August now is the date when the tariffs are going to look to take into effect. Right now, Australia looks like we'll probably get about a 10% tariff, which is on the lower end and great news for us. But other countries like Japan and South Korea have been hit with 25% tariffs. And Myanmar, I don't even know what Myanmar export, have been hit with a 40% tariff, which is just insanity for one of the poorest countries in the world. So we've got a bit of a reprieve, but you really need to think about what's going to happen there. Because I know that in the US, a lot of the retailers there, they're effectively walking in eggshells. They don't know what's going to happen. And they're living in a world of complete uncertainty right now, with not many imports coming into the US. All right, our final story for the day is one of not really David versus Goliath. It's probably like Goliath versus Goliath light, with Lululemon taking on Costco as dupe wars heat up. Now, if you're on TikTok, if you're on anything, you would be seeing so much talk about dupe culture right now, as so many brands are coming out with dupes, whether it be fragrances, bag charms, handbags, and now clothing and activewear, where Lululemon are suing Costco for selling knockoffs of their Align leggings. Now, why is this such a big deal? Is that they are alleging that Costco are effectively copying the legging, the look and feel of the legging, and actively promoting it as a dupe, and actually getting their influencers to promote it as a dupe. So what this does for Lulu, which is one of the ultra luxury activewear brands in the world, is that they need to protect that whole perception of being premium. And when you have Costco running around saying that they've got a dupe, it devalues that. Because if Costco are selling it for $40 and Lulu are selling it for $180, and they're saying it's the same thing, well, it devalues Lulu. Because suddenly you look at Lulu and say, that's probably not worth $180. And ultimately, that is going to impact Lulu's business, as it does for any luxury brand or anyone who plays in that space and is trying to charge a premium for what they offer. Because like I said, we do live in this whole dupe economy now, through Lululemon, Skims, what have you. So it's really important to think about how you can actually protect your brand when you get to that certain size. Because you can't just rely on your product and not expect someone to copy you, because people will copy you. You really need to think about what IP is actually protectable. What are you actually putting into this, which can actually be defensible? But then also, how do you build a community around that as well, that people will say, no, don't buy that one, you have to buy this one. And also thinking about the value proposition as well. How do you highlight the differences and call out the fact that these dupes are dupes for a reason, that they're not as good? But further to that as well, this is where you also need to think about how can you continue to create things which are differentiated, limited, and personalized. Anything that's hard to fake. So collaborations are a great one right now, as we talked about many, many times. Licensing also. How can you do partnerships which help you stand out in the market? If I use Maison de Sabre as an example, yes, they've got fruit charms, which are now being duped like crazy around the world. But the fact is that the fruit charms, which they produce, are all handcrafted, made out of sustainable leather. It's actually leather offcuts. So it's leather which was bound for the bin. It's being recycled, upcycled into a new product. But they also work with licensing like Hello Kitty, to come up with limited edition products which only they have. So things which are really hard to fake, and a narrative which they own. So the silver lining in all this is that if someone is duping you, it means that you're doing something right. So that's fantastic. But now you need to think about, how do you continue to evolve? Because the protection game is very expensive if you're going to be going up against a Costco. And you don't necessarily want to get caught in that war. So you need to think about what you can be putting out there to continue to evolve your brand, evolve your product, and make sure that you're protected. All right, the final shout out I'm going to make today is for a Netflix documentary I recently watched. It's from the Trainwreck series, and it's about American Apparel. So American Apparel, through the early 2000s, one of the hottest fashion brands out there. This is a fantastic deep dive, well worth an hour of your time to dig into how this cult brand was created by breaking all the rules when it came to fashion, and how they managed to burn it all down very, very quickly through hubris, very questionable HR practices, and a very interesting, well, let's face it, the guy was a scumbag CEO. So if you like retail documentaries, which kind of dig into some brands which have not done so well, this is for you. It's absolutely wild. There's sex, sweatshops, Dove Charney being Dove Charney, and a real cautionary tale about brands scaling too fast, believing their own hype, and forgetting to actually build in the operational maturity, which we talk about all the time. All right, that's it for this solo episode of This Week in E-Commerce. Hope you enjoyed the ride. If you did, drop a comment, share it with your friends, send me your favorite moment, and use my code and come along to Online Retailer. I really hope to see you there. In the meantime, keep innovating, keep growing, and keep selling. And we'll see you all next week.